the Gelatinous Cube! Everyone's favorite D&D dessert monster, Reaper Bones, clear resin, Gelatinous Cube. Oh, it's so neat. It's also something you don't have to paint, really. This is more going to be an assembly guide for this particular item. There is a chewy center, shall we say, for this model in the Gelatinous Cube, a little debris pile that sits on the bottom, which I initially started this video by starting to paint that, the idea that you can see it through the sides of the Gelatinous Cube, but unfortunately you can't. Reaper decided to make this very textured, and because it's textured you cannot see it through the wall, so I decided to skip that and keep that little bit for something else a little bit later on. First thing you want to do is to clean this extremely well with some degreaser when you get it and let it dry, because it is a very greasy material. Once that's done, we can start working on the assembly, and for that I'm using 5-minute 2-part epoxy. Using this because it's going to fill gaps a little bit better than super glue. It's also going to be stronger, and super glue tends to, it's very strong but it's very brittle, and when you're using on something that's a bit of a more flexible surface, you want to use different options. A few rubber bands, and that will keep everything together and help close any gaps while the epoxy dries. There still are significant gaps on the outside of the cube, and to fill that I'm using Silicone Sealant out of a tube from the hardware store. You can use the epoxy that we used earlier. I mainly did this because I wanted to see if it would work. You know, I do the experiment so you don't have to. The epoxy dried almost too clear. I mean, it was perfectly fine, but it was actually more transparent than the plastic of the Gelatinous Cube. The silicone was a bit closer of a match, and also the silicone I can put on a bit thicker and slightly sculpt. So as you can see, we're doing this very crudely, just putting it on with a little wooden stick and smearing it in place with my finger. So we could call it quits right there, considering that a Gelatinous Cube is supposed to be transparent. However, I'm a bit of an idiot, and I can't leave things well enough alone, and also, well, painting is in the title of this YouTube channel, so we're gonna paint our cube, or at least add a little bit of color to it, because why the hell not? So, making some lemon-flavored Gelatinous Cube, and starting off with a very, very thin coat of, not even a coat really, but anyway, we're applying some very thin yellow ink, and a couple things. First of all, I started painting on the inside, which had two things we have to deal with. First of all, I had to seal the inside of the cube as well as the outside seam lines, otherwise the ink would get drawn into the seam lines and be these weird funky lines on the inside of the cube. Secondly, I did try, as you see here, painting just the inside of the cube, but it didn't look right because the walls, the connecting points of the cube are too thick, and so it just was white with this lemon center to it. So after painting the inside, I went around and painted the outside as well. I'm just adding a little bit of the exact same thinned yellow ink and just putting it on and wiping it off with my finger so it's not an even coat. Some of the clearer area shows through, and hopefully that carries the yellow color. After allowing that to completely dry, mixed in a little bit of green ink with the yellow ink and applying another layer. Exact same process before, however this time I'm working towards the bottom of the cube. The final coat, a lot more green ink added to the mix, and this time I am applying it just on the inside. Wasn't too happy how my invisible cube was coming out here until I did this step. Putting the darker color on the inside really added or returned the translucent effect back to the cube. So when you are doing these ink layers like this, just make sure that the ink doesn't run anywhere, because blobs will show up in the end. However, you can scrape them away if you're very careful. And after an acrylic gloss coat, here is our finished lemon lime flavored gelatinous cube. I make things complicated, don't I? As I said, you can stop at the assembly process if you want a standard clear cube, or you could paint it this way. Actually, I think doing blues and purples would be really interesting. You can also base it if you want. There is the center that you can theoretically put a miniature inside the cube. However, I would be very careful with that since there's not a whole lot of room. Don't go ruining your miniatures or your cube. But you know what? I may actually return to this project one day and repaint this thing opaque, because Reaper's version of the cube here is so textured. It's not very transparent, but all that texture would really allow for some interesting opaque effects just with standard paint. So we may paint a solid cube a little bit later down the road. Until that day, though, let me know your favorite use of gelatinous cubes in games, because I have a couple of them. They are fun creatures to put into your campaigns. I thought about doing a very short pit that your players can easily jump over, but waiting on the opposite side of the pit is a gelatinous cube, and they just, slam right into it. Or there's something in the bottom of a pit that they can easily jump down and get, but it's actually at the bottom of the gelatinous cube, and so they jump right into it. Oh, so many ways to screw your players. If you got any, let me know. Other than that, thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye-bye.